Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron. Joel, you're more than just an object to me. I value you a lot.
Oh my goodness. We are off to a raucous start here. We're going to be talking about value objects, which is already nerdy and geeky, and will probably make different people mad for different reasons. But
Mhm.
like a pun to get us going, that seems appropriate. Um, I will set a little context here. So I originally was trying to talk about value objects in a tip, and Aaron was like, "Nah, man." Like I think basically we try to make the tips in our newsletter short, and it was turning out too long. And it's like maybe it's a series of tips, and like maybe I don't care, but then we're going to talk about it today. And so to first set the stage, if you've never heard that term value object, or maybe if you have heard it, um, in either event, I think we should give a definition of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, tell me.
I will I will joke a little bit here and say, us Laravel developers have a somewhat notorious history of taking well-established terms and making them mean something else, right? Like facade. And I'm fine with that. And so I'm going to continue that tradition. And so value object, if you're coming from the domain-driven design world, they have a very special meaning and a very technical meaning, which I'm not going to get into here. I'm just going to say that's not what I'm talking about. So when I say value object, I simply mean a class, right?
A
An object,
PHP object.
PHP object, which is an instance of a class. And the thing that makes it different or more specialized than just any old class is, generally speaking, you set its value when you create it and you don't change its value. Like there's no mutable state. You might think of it as if I were to pass an array of like 8 values into some method, I might instead throw a value object because I can put types on it. I can put, I have to have all the data in a certain shape to create it, but it's not an object I'm creating and mutating, and like it's not living for a long time. Does that make sense? Did I help clarify this at all?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times when you have, if it's an array that's coming in, that's already one step further. You already did some refactoring. But if it's like a method that has like seven parameters or something like that, people start,
Right.
there's the code smell of, hey, there's too many properties coming in here. Let's refactor that. So yeah, that's a good example saying we might create a value object for passing into a method or something like that that needs a large amount of context and data, and it needs
Mhm.
it in a predictable, processable shape.
Yeah. And with more recent, newer versions of PHP, this has gotten really nice to do. Like in the past, you kind of had to fake some things, or you had to have some conventions in place, or there's a lot of boilerplate. But now literally you can create a class with just a constructor, and you can do like constructor promotion, right? And you can even say read only. So you can
Mhm.
basically have essentially a one-line constructor in a otherwise empty class and use it. And you get some benefits from that. So maybe first I'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits. And then we could talk about like when would you actually use it? Like we don't want to go to the other extreme, I don't think. And like all of a sudden we're creating value objects for everything.
No,
We're passing a single
we're
value.
not programming in Java. We don't need
That's
string
right.
string equals new string.
Ooh, yeah. I'm glad we're not there. So anyways, like I think for me, the number one time I would reach for this is the scenario we already alluded to, where you have a method where you just need to pass a lot of data into it. And what is a lot? I don't know. Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 10? Like
Yeah,
there's some
that's a internal or
right.
a team sort of
Yeah.
limitation, but it's
Yeah.
somewhere around more than a couple.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it for 1 or 2. Like 3, probably not either, but like above that, I would start to think about it. And the first method of refactoring that most PHP devs go to is to make it an array, because like that's our bucket for everything, right? Let's slap an array around it and we can pass that around. And now technically we have one parameter we're passing in, but that parameter has to contain 7 keys. And like how do we specify what those keys are? We've sort of we fixed one problem, and I think we've created a new problem.
Right.
Whereas a value object, you could specify those properties, and you can specify if they have default values or if they're all required, and you can specify the types of them, and they all have to be provided at the beginning, and you have a good value. So like to me, that's the benefit. Is it's I like types, I like things being clearly communicated in code, I like static analysis, and I think the value object helps us in this regard more than an array would.
Hmm. But why wouldn't I want to use one then?
Okay, why wouldn't you? I mean, some people do. Some people would create a value object, or the other term you might hear is data transfer object, DTO,
Hmm.
and they'll go nuts and they'll create them for everything. Again, I think here I wouldn't do that because I like to stick with Laravel conventions, either that the framework establishes or things that are just sort of common patterns in the community. And so if I'm not getting a benefit out of it, I don't think I want to have to create extra classes just for every method call I'm going to make between two things that require then one or two pieces of data. That's sort of my thing there is like if it's not giving me extra value, I don't want the extra ceremony of having this extra class.
And I'm going to go just one step farther nerdy and
Okay.
say, like, a hard set rule would be, is the data I'm working with structured, and does it require a specific order or whatever?
Okay.
So, like, for example, like if I had to method that I had to pass in an array of bunch of colors, I'm not going to create a
Mhm.
color array object or a color object.
Yeah.
If it doesn't matter the order and it doesn't matter whatever, I might just pass in that array there.
Yeah.
So again, it has something to do with also that extra step, which is like, do I need this structure, and is there any sort of rules around the data types and things like that that would make a reasonably large difference, either a bug or change the structure of logic. So, of
Sure.
course, you said stuff in a completely human way, and I went but that there is a nuance there that
Yeah.
we just aren't necessarily mentioning, but it's a calculation that happens in your head.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I was thinking of as you said it, well, two things. One is um, with PHP doc blocks, you can go nuts and specify array shapes. I just don't like that syntax. I think it's weird, especially when we have something native in PHP to do it.
Hmm.
So that's just maybe one acknowledgement if somebody was thinking, hey, just use array shape in your PHP doc blocks. You could do that, and you would get some of the static analysis benefits I'm talking about. But the second thing, like another reason a value object is useful, I talked about we're not going to mutate the state, and it can be a simple constructor in an otherwise empty class, but it doesn't have to be. And so maybe the other time this would be valuable is if we need that data in a structured way that's different than the way we provide it. So I'm trying to
Hmm.
think of an example that won't require a ton of setup, but let's just say you had some like an object that represented configuration data for a system, and maybe at the top level there's like two or three keys that you have to provide, and each of those keys can have a variety of values set. And so like some of that you could maybe do with an enum, like here are the three possible keys, or
Or
even the
maybe
configure.
default values,
Sure.
and if it's coming in saying like you have these two or three settings,
Yeah.
and you provide 0 to 3 configuration objects
Mm-hmm.
or configuration settings,
Yeah.
then the completed setting object could be a mix of the two different. But we're kind
Yeah.
of then going a little bit from value objects into just classes.
Right. But I think, and again, I am altering the definition to suit my personal preferences. But
Yeah.
yes, in the traditional sense, you might not have helper methods on a traditional, domain value object. But for what we're doing here, the thing that would make me call it a value object still is sort of the idea that it's the data is sent once when it's constructed and the data is never changed. I'm only adding helpers to it. And so you can put,
Mhm.
just like you can put helper methods on an enum, obviously you can't change the internal state of the values of
Yeah.
an enum at, at runtime. You probably shouldn't. I guess you could do anything you want with reflection, but it's sort of the same thing. Like if I want a cast, I want to take this value object and be able to serialize it so I can stick it in an eloquent model, which is going to get written to the database. Like that could be a useful thing too. Where else would that logic live? Like it really makes sense to kind of put it in the thing that's holding the data too, even if we're not mutating that data. So if you haven't completely gone to sleep at this point, I think it's interesting to consider, like, and maybe like the call to action here is like, think about your code. Are there places where you have just a ton of parameters being sent in, or where it's just kind of painful, or like, oh, we have to add one thing, or this particular call site only needs some of these options, this one needs another. It's just something to consider that could be a useful way to introduce a value object.
I don't know if it's this way everywhere in the world, but when we celebrate Halloween in the United States, everything that kids know about the world goes out the window for one day. I just don't understand it. We say, don't talk to strangers, and certainly don't let them take pictures of you. And then on this one day, we're like, please talk to strangers, and they're going to take pictures of you. And
Right.
you say, don't walk up to random houses by yourself. A lot of times the parents will step back and let the kid go up by themselves. And then it's like, don't take candy from strangers, except for this one day when the job is to take all of the candy.
I think the lesson here is that it is training kids to be more independent and to not listen to these rules, right? Like,
Not,
see, it was fine this one day. Nothing bad happened.
yeah. Always follow the rules unless there's candy. If you're like me and you don't really necessarily listen to the first few seconds of a podcast or anything really, you might have missed what Joel said when he first started.
I was talking about our newsletter and the daily Laravel tips. If you want to check that out, head over to masteringlaravel.io, and the sign up form and all the previous tips are available on that site.